Hi and welcome. My name is Johnny Salazar, and I'm excited to teach you today about Heloise and Abelard. I did it on purpose. You'll find out why later. I haven't done an academic presentation in quite a long time, so I'm a little nervous, but I think I'll be okay. And I don't speak French or Latin, so I'll be butchering all of those names, as well as getting tongue-tied in some of the quotes. But I put them on the screen for you so you can read them for yourself and not get lost in my tongue-tiedness with this English. Yes. With that being known, let's go ahead and get started so we can learn more about these interesting people. All right. How Heloise used Abelard. Heloise used her connection with Abelard to push for reform for her and her sisters. She repeatedly asked for her preacher's assistance and used the tradition of the Cura Marianum, otherwise known as the care of nuns, as a way to seek for guidance. In this video presentation, I would like to highlight how after finding herself as a bride of Christ in the middle of an ecclesiastical reform movement, she decided to use her connection to Peter Abelard, not only to provide validation for her and her profession, but to have him write a monastic rule for her and her nuns to live by. Then lastly, I would like to take a moment and look at the legacy of Heloise herself. When people first think of Abelard and Heloise, they think of the love letters, that made-for-TV drama that they produced. However, the work of Heloise and Abelard goes much deeper than some juicy gossip. To better understand the ending of the story, we must first need to look at the religious climate at the time and at Peter Abelard himself. During the 10th century, Christian reform started to take place in Western Europe. Religious men increasingly sought to purify the church from the lay interference and return to the supposedly authentic model provided in the New Testament. Members of this movement wanted to help distinguish laymen from the clergy. They sought to end clerical marriage, a somewhat common practice at the time, and sought to place women into two roles, wives or concubines. The Catholic Church expected laymen to participate in the world, to own property, to be fruitful and multiply, and pass their wealth on to the next generation. Where clergy members, however, were required to engage in religious practice, churchmen were encouraged to abstain from secular activities and interests beginning in the 11th century, in order to ensure their impartiality as judges of disputes between laymen and to defend the church property from secular encroachment. On the surface, these concerns seem to have little to do with women. Yet, contact with women constituted a binding line between laymen and clergy. Since marriage, sexual activity, which leads to heirs, were crucial to the fulfillment of secular responsibilities, interaction with women became an easy line to draw in the sand to help distinguish between laymen and clergy. And by the 12th century, the time of Abelard and Heloise, this idea of separation was in full swing. Yet others began to see how the division could actually affect the female sex, and sought ways to assist Christ's bridegroom, who had donned the veil and no longer were able to fill the position of a wife or a concubine found in the world of laymen, and were desperately requiring the assistance of male clergy. Enter Robert of Bruxelles, who understood the need for the Cura Marianum. At Robert's deathbed, he famously urged his brothers in Christ to continue their unique service to the women of the community. Robert continues saying, persist in your purpose, that is, obey the command of the Christ's handmaidens for the salvation of your souls. Well before Abelard and Heloise had entered the scene, Robert of Bruxelles observed that women could not function without the sacraments and could not administer them themselves. Therefore, the nuns were required the assistance of male clergy. As a result, Bruxelles sets up an abbey where males of the monastery were made the women's servants rather than their superiors, maintaining the separation by allowing women to run the convent completely under the abbess's supervision. In this case, one can see that not all monastic orders view the necessity for complete separation from female sex, but rather saw the need for the male clergy to engage and serve with their sisters in Christ, a sentiment that Abelard would subsequently express as a member of the church. Now let's look at Heloise made use of her relationship with Abelard. To understand the infamous letters, one must first understand the conditions that led to their creation. After the birth of Heloise's child Astrolabe, and before Abelard's castration, Abelard sent Heloise to Ardite, where she reluctantly later took the veil at her husband's request. Meanwhile, Abelard had entered the monastic life as well. At the monastery of St. Denis, while his popularity garnered him a lot of attention, making him a desirable monk to have in your flock, as a fellow brother of Christ, his attitude and his tendency of being verbally aggressive, which was required for the dialectic approach that he was famous for, left much to be desired. In fact, he was no longer welcomed at St. Denis after proving that the founder of the monastery, who they all thought was the patron saint of France, was not that Denis that they claimed, but rather a separate, less notable St. Denis, causing much embarrassment for the monks who lived there and the people of the town in general. And in 1126, he was appointed the abbot of St. Gildas. He had been elected by his brothers based on his reputation. However, they were extremely dismayed to see that Abelard was a passionate reformer of monastery discipline. In the first letter to his quote-unquote friend, Abelard alleges that the monks of St. Gildas even tried to murder him multiple times. Therefore, it's no surprise that when Heloise and her sisters were evicted from their home by Abelard's former abbot from St. Denis, Abelard interpreted it as a message that he would assist Heloise and the sisters who remained by her side. In fact, in that same letter to his friend, we learned that Peter decided to gift the oratory that he had started during his hermitage, that he called the Paraclete, to Heloise and her sisters, saying, "I realized that an opportunity had been furnished by the Lord, where I might provide for our oratory. By giving Heloise and her sisters a place to practice their faith, the two parties entered into an unspoken yet expected agreement, one that Heloise would soon bring up in letter 2. Speaking of letter 2, let's just jump right in, which is Heloise's first letter to Abelard. One can see Heloise laying the foundation of Abelard's providing service to her community by saying, "Whatever this young vineyard is, owing only to you, and is your part to employ your whole care to cultivate and improve it. This ought to be one of the principal affairs of your life." It is obvious that Heloise knew that she needed help and started to hint towards the need early off in her letters to Peter Abelard. Now skipping to letter 6. It is here that Heloise is once again writing Abelard. After being rehoused in Abelard's former oratory and having no formal guidance as the nuns were alone in the Paraclete, it comes to no shock that when she reaches out to her former teacher, husband, and now brother and father in Christ for help. This time, she is no longer hinting. She straightforward asks him to teach and inform the sisters about the origin of the women in the religious life, hoping to show where they may fall into the family of the monastic order. Heloise writes, "And so all we handmaids of Christ, and in the Christ thy daughters demand, with supplication 2 things of thy fatherhood, which we foresee to be right and necessary for ourselves. Whereof the former is thou wilt instruct us the origin of the order of nuns began, and what authority for our profession. And the other is thou wilt institute some rule for us, and set forth in writing, which shall be proper for women, and shall definitely describe the state and habit of the conversation, which we do not find to have at any other time by the Holy Fathers." One can't help but see Heloise leveraging her understanding of Abelard and the way he thinks to use him to justify the calling they both know he placed upon her. According to McLaughlin, an internationally renowned scholar of the Middle Ages, she suggests that Heloise may have asked Abelard because the nuns may have been seen as laywomen living a religious life, And for Heloise and Abelard and a host of 12th century writers, women religious in general, and abbess in particular, were definitely not lay women, and they were considered themselves cleric, ordained as any male cleric. So Heloise used Abelard and his status as a male clergy to make a logical and defensible argument that would give significance to her role as an abbess and the vocation of nuns for her sisters who looked up to her. In letter 7, Abelard takes on Heloise's request to provide her meaning. He argues for the order of Sanctimonium, aka the history of holy women. Throughout the 7th letter, Abelard highlights famous women in the Bible to help establish a connection between females and the religious vocation. He uses Anna and Elizabeth, Mary Magdalene, and even the mother of Jesus to help prove his point. He goes on to say in letter 7, and so Christ, the end of justice, the consummation of all good, coming in the fullness of time, that he may make perfect good things that have begun, or reveal good hidden things, as he has come to call either sex and to redeem them. So thoughtful fit to unite both sexes in the true monkhood of his congregation, that thereafter authority for this profession might be given to both, to male and women, and the perfect way of life might be laid before all, which they should imitate. Abelard believed that Jesus established 2 orders, namely the deacon and the priesthood, meaning that all other orders, those issued by the apostles, would and could be seen as not true orders at all. Mary Grace points out in her book, The Hidden History of Women's Ordination. This understanding did not affect all ordinances of women, however, for deaconesses were part of the diaconate and were understood still to be ordained in the church, especially as abbesses were understood to be deaconesses by at least some of the contemporary writers. Abbesses would be validatedly ordered or ordained deaconesses, even under this new understanding. The teaching then that Jesus only founded the orders deaconesses and priests would not exclude women from ordained ministry. We know that Abelard maintains this opinion since he takes the effort to note that the church fathers explain the roles of women inside the church. In the past, what were today known as abbesses were known as deaconesses. This allows him to grant Heloise some authority in her position and elevate her to a position of clergy and no longer a laywoman. To support this view, he cited statements of St. Gregory. Youthful abbesses, we do not venerately forbid. Let thy brotherhood therefore allow no bishop to give the veil except the virgin of 80 years, whose life morals then shall have proved. Okay. As bishops are the ones who are ordained deaconesses, this quotation is particularly powerful. It follows that the rule is intended to restrict the deaconess's ordination, and to limit something implies that it was necessary to exist. Abelard then uses Phoebe as an example of an early church deaconess, citing Claudius, saying, on apostle authority that women also may be ordained in the service of the church, which office Phoebe established with the church deaconesses, which is at Cenchrea. This further helps to provide the deaconesses were established in the early church, and by using logic and reasoning, Abelard establishes the continuation of his early religious vocation by concluding the modern abbess is a deaconesses and is just a simple title change. After laying this important information and knowledge, Abelard sets his eyes on the second request the nuns of the Paraclete gave. That being writing a monastic rule for them. By giving into her request by creating a rule designed solely for females, Abelard is confirming two things. One, that he has formally acknowledged that he needs to provide help for the nuns, therefore entering into a cur madianum relationship with the nuns. And two, by acknowledging that women need separation as a separate rule, one that is less harsh, he in some ways commenting on their condition as the weaker sex. The rule he provides them is called the Tripartite Treatise. It is found in letter 8, which really reads more as a book than a letter because of its length and how it focuses on 3 monastic virtues he thought runs could follow. The first one being the life of continence, being chaste. The second one, the life of poverty, which means giving up possessions to focus on the divine, not just happen to be without. And thirdly, the life of silence, which he concluded means less idle talk leads to less sin and more time for contemplation on the scriptures and prayers. Abelard goes on laying out the structure of the order as well, and saying, 7 persons out of your number were considered to be necessary for the whole administration of the monastery, and to suffice, namely the portress, the cellaress, the wardrober, the infirmarian, the chantress, the sacristan, and lastly, the deaconesses, whom they now call abbesses. Here we can see him solidifying the term deaconesses and the status that should come with it as a woman of the cloth and the head of the female order. This idea of elevation of nuns, including Heloise, is not new to letters, however. It is first explored in the 4th letter to Abelard. When Heloise questions the placement of her name on the 3rd letter, saying, I marvel, my all, that against the custom in writing letters, nay, against the natural order of things, at the head of the greeting is thou hast made bold to set my name before thine, to wit the woman before the man, the wife before the husband, the handmaiden before the master, the nun before the monk and the priest, the deaconesses before the abbot. Right indeed is the order and honorable way that thou who write to the superiors or to their equals place the names of those they are writing before their own. But if they write to their inferiors, those take precedence in the order of their writing who is take precedence in rank. Since this marvel takes place in the start of their exchange, it's easy to interpret Abelard as a feminist, one who sees women as equals. And his response only encourages his reading, for he says, of the unnatural, as thou sayest, order of your greeting, that was done. If thou examine it closely, according to thy opinion also, for it is common knowledge that thyself hast shown that when anyone writes to their superiors, their names are put first. And thou must understand that thou didst become my superior the day on which thou becamest to me the lady becoming the bride of my lord. Okay. As we can see, he's claiming that he regards her as his superior the moment she took on the nun's habit. So what exactly does this mean? Susan Kramer explains that this elevation in her article, we speak to God with our thoughts, Abelard and the implication of private communication with God. She states that Abelard's letter to Heloise provides an excursus on the special efficacy of women's private prayers for their loved ones. Heloise and her nuns are especially favored because they are the brides of Christ. Like the brides of Kings, Heloise must withdraw nightly into the king's bedchamber, that secret place of contemplation and peace, to seek her true love and prayer. The bridal chamber symbolizes the true monastic solitude the others have abandoned when they celebrate the divine offices with cloisters of choir wide open. Whoever wishes to learn the secret of monastic quiet must be glad to have a narrow bed and not to have a wide one. The narrow bed belongs to the bridegroom that is to contemplative soul, which more closely joined to Christ. Hinting that nuns are not closer with God. A quote from St. Paul also is reminiscent of this when he says, "He that is joined unto the Lord's Spirit is one spirit." Peter explains how the nuns might utilize this relationship with Christ to help others by praying for them. So much purer and more efficacy we believe you to be, prayer, and therefore the more venerably we demand your aid, which prayers also we believe are to be made the more devoutly for me, the closely we are bound by the mutual charity. The whole development of the Cur Malium, which is a code of relationship between man and woman, the cloth, can now be seen. While women require men to do religious duties, men require prayers of their souls because the females are and always will be closer to God. One has to wonder if this is just lip service. When one reads the letters and all of Abelard's work, we notice Peter refers to the female sex as a lesser sex and males as a more powerful sex. and why feminize the holy order if he thought religious women were superior? Why does he allow women to eat meat 3 times a week in the tribulate? And why are accommodations made to allow them to indulge in drinking wine, which is previously forbidden by the original Protestant order? This is because Abelard reveals his true evaluation of the female sex, which is reminiscent of St. Paul, who saw women and men equal, but only in heaven. For St. Paul writes in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 to 15, "A woman should learn in quietness and fulfill submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. For Adam was the first formed, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was a woman who had deceived and became the sinner. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue faith, love, and holiness with prosperity," which Abelard alludes to in his first letter in Heloise. It's very reminiscent. Let's read it. "But the talent of thy prudence, what usury it returns daily to the Lord. Thou who hast already borne many spiritual daughters to the Lord, while I remain utterly barren, the labor in vain among the son of the perdition. Oh, how detestable loss, how lamentable a misfortune! If given others to the filthiness of the carnal pleasures, I thought were to bring forth children and pain for the world, who now delivered of numerous progeny with exploitation for heaven. Nor wouldst thou then be more than a woman who can transcend even man, and haven't turned the curse of Eve into a blessing of Mary." This familiar quote echoes back to the apostle and is demonstrated by the 3 rules in the Triptych, where we see his genuine colors splitting through the veil. Here we can see the medieval thoughts of women coming to the surface, one that even the educated can't seem to escape. So while Heloise is his sister in Christ, he cannot be her equal, for she carries the curse of Eve. So while Abelard and Heloise's love affair was brief, we can see how Heloise took advantage of her familiarity with Abelard to start over for herself and her fellow nuns. Because of her relationship, she felt confident enough to seek him for advice and to persuade him to enter a relationship with the nuns under the cover of the Cura Malium. While she was still limited by the medieval world's view of gender, she also knew she had already proven herself to Abelard. He had to see her more than simply a gorgeous face. but in the first letter to his friend, Abelard remarked, while in the faith she was not inferior to other women, in her abundance of her learning was supreme. So she utilized what she had left, her intellect and her penmanship, to acquire what she needed from man who had given her away from Christ. So perhaps Heloise would have not chosen to be the deaconess of Paraclete herself, but in the end, it allowed her to continue her studies and to become a safe place for other women who wanted to learn and to be free from the duties of being a wife or a concubine. And according to Clark Kelso, article Women in Power, Front of Foot and Paraclete Compared, Heloise created an order with 6 daughter houses, an independent order, an institution introduced by women, which was unheard of in the 12th century. And since Abelard retired in 1142 and the first expansion was in 1143, it appears to be the work of Heloise herself that the Paraclete had indeed grown. And in 1131, the Paraclete was officially recognized by the Pope. So in the end, Heloise had autonomy for a man who helped create a safe place for women to come, for the student had become the deaconesses. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Have a great day. Bye now.